Chapter 1. The Leak. It all started with a simple mistake. A soldier named Charles Campion fled from a secret government lab in California after a containment breach. What he carried in his blood wasn't just a virus. It was the end of the world. The strain called Project Blue, or Captain Trips, was a man-made superflu with a 99.4% fatality rate. As Campion drove across the southwestern U.S. with his wife and child, the disease spread faster than wildfire. He died in Texas, crashing into a gas station. But by then, it was too late. The virus was airborne, aggressive, and utterly unstoppable. Cities fell one by one, overwhelmed by corpses and chaos. Hospitals turned into morgues. Military-enforced quarantines failed, and public trust dissolved into terror. Martial law was declared, then abandoned. Civilization collapsed within a month. Families were wiped out, governments disappeared, and a strange silence fell over the planet. The world as we knew it was gone. Chapter 2. The Survivors Awaken. Amid the silence and decay, a few people remained alive, not by luck, but by something else. They were immune to the virus, and each began to wake up in a dead world. Stu Redman, once a quiet Texan, was captured and studied by military scientists, then escaped into the empty wilderness. Franny Goldsmith buried her father with her own hands in Maine, all while pregnant. Larry Underwood, a washed-up musician, escaped New York City just before it became a tomb. Nick Andros, a deaf-mute drifter, survived a violent attack in rural Nebraska. These characters didn't know one another, but they began to share the same strange dreams. In the darkness of sleep, they saw a kind old woman in a cornfield, urging them west, and a terrifying man in black, walking highways, grinning with malice. Something beyond the plague was at work. The survivors were being summoned, each to a different destiny. Chapter 3. The Dark Man. In the wastelands of America, an evil presence stirred. Randall Flagg. He was more than a man. He was a force of chaos and cruelty, walking with the wind at his back. Flagg gathered the worst remnants of humanity: killers, ex-soldiers, arsonists, fanatics. They gravitated to his aura like flies to rot. In Las Vegas, he established a new empire with strict rules and public executions. Loyalty was rewarded with power. Disobedience meant death. Among his followers was Trash Can Man, a schizophrenic pyromaniac with a hunger to be useful. Flagg's leadership wasn't political, it was supernatural. He appeared in dreams, manipulated minds, and knew things no man should know. He promised safety through violence, control through fear. And while the Free Zone in Boulder began to rebuild society with hope, Flagg was building an army for war. Chapter 4. Gathering at Hemingford Home. Meanwhile, the survivors who dreamed of the old woman were pulled to Nebraska, to a tiny house in a cornfield. There, they met Mother Abagail, a 108-year-old woman who cooked biscuits, read the Bible, and spoke with God. She welcomed them not as warriors, but as children of purpose. Stu, Franny, Larry, Nick, and others began to converge at her home. Despite their differences, a sense of unity formed. They knew something greater was unfolding, a spiritual war, where they were the first soldiers of the light. As their group grew, they shared stories, built trust, and realized that being immune wasn't random. They had been spared for a reason. After prayer and meditation, Mother Abagail told them to move west, to Boulder, Colorado, where they would begin again. Their walk was long and dangerous, but full of meaning. The world was dead, but they were alive, and that meant something. Chapter 5. The Boulder Free Zone. In Boulder, The survivors began to rebuild what the plague had erased. They called it the Boulder Free Zone, and there they laid the foundations of a new society. Electricity was restored, food shared, and leadership established through committees. Stu Redmond naturally rose as a voice of calm strength. Franny tried to find hope for her unborn child. Larry, once selfish and afraid, grew into a man people respected. Nick became a guiding figure, working with Tom Cullen, a mentally disabled man whose loyalty and innocence anchored many. But not everyone fit in easily. Harold Lauder, intelligent and awkward, felt alienated, especially when Franny rejected his advances. His loneliness turned to bitterness. And Nadine Cross, a quiet woman marked by darkness, waited for a sign from the dreams, one she couldn't resist forever. As hope grew in Boulder, so did the shadows, and war loomed closer every day. Chapter 6. Betrayal Within. Harold Lauder, once a bullied teenager, now walked Boulder's streets with resentment boiling beneath his polite smile. Rejected by Franny and ignored by others, he masked his pain with false civility, while writing chilling manifestos in a secret journal. Nadine Cross, haunted and waiting for Flagg's signal, finally gave in to the darkness. She seduced Harold with promises of destiny and power. Together, they built a bomb hidden in a closet during a Boulder leadership meeting. Nick, ever vigilant, sensed something was wrong, but didn't get there in time. The explosion rocked the free zone. Nick and others were killed instantly. Grief swept the community like a second plague. Mother Abagail, feeling responsible for leaving them unguarded, fled into the wilderness to seek forgiveness. The survivors, once focused on rebuilding, were now forced to face a brutal truth. The war had already begun. Harold and Nadine escaped toward Flagg's waiting arms. Boulder would never be the same. Chapter 7. The Prophet's Departure. After the bombing, the free zone was consumed by mourning and confusion. The people demanded answers, and Mother Abagail returned from the wilderness with one. God had shown her the next step. 4 men must go west, on foot, with no weapons and no guarantee of survival. Stu, Larry, Ralph, and Glenn accepted without hesitation. Tom Cullen, sweet and slow-witted but guided by divine dreams, was sent ahead covertly as a spy. The men said goodbye to their friends, leaving behind comfort and safety. Their journey would be spiritual as much as physical. As they walked across empty roads and dying forests, they felt the weight of prophecy pressing down. This was no longer just about survival. It was about judgment. Each step brought them closer to Las Vegas, to Flagg, and to the final reckoning. Chapter 8. The Walk. The men faced blistering sun, freezing nights, and the haunting silence of a world nearly extinct. They passed ghost towns, rusting cars, and places where time seemed to have stopped. Glenn offered philosophy and humor, lightening their burden. Larry, once selfish, now led with heart. Ralph brought steady faith, while Stu carried unshakable determination until his leg snapped on a rocky slope. With pain in his eyes and tears in his voice, Stu begged them to leave him behind. After a long, aching farewell, the others walked on. Stu waited in agony, preparing to die, watching the stars and praying he hadn't failed. He was alone in the mountains, but not forgotten. Somewhere in the distance, the final confrontation approached. The stand was almost here. Chapter 9. Flagg's Court. Las Vegas was no longer a city. It was a stage for terror. Flagg ruled like a demigod, with executions televised for entertainment. Trash Can Man returned from the desert, burned and babbling, but carrying a horrifying gift, a live nuclear warhead. Flagg praised him, though the madness in Trash Can's eyes was a warning. Larry, Glenn, and Ralph were captured and brought before Flagg's inner circle. Glenn mocked Flagg openly, refusing to fear a monster dressed in denim. He was shot on the spot. Larry and Ralph, even facing death, stood tall, silent rebels in a city of fear. Flagg's magic cracked for a moment, his facade slipping. The crowd, once loyal, began to murmur. Faith was weakening, and something powerful was watching. Chapter 10. The Stand. On the day of execution, Flagg summoned his people to witness dominance. Larry and Ralph stood proud, ready to die as symbols of resistance. Flagg's powers flared. Lightning danced at his fingertips. But then, Trash Can Man stumbled in, whispering his final devotion, dragging the nuclear bomb behind him. At that moment, a massive hand of pure light, divine, unknowable, descended from the sky. The hand of God. It touched the bomb, igniting it instantly. A blinding white explosion swallowed Las Vegas, vaporizing Flagg's empire, his followers, and his dark plans. Silence followed. Judgment had come. The stand had been made, not through violence, but through faith. Evil was consumed in its own fire. Chapter 11. Redemption in the Rubble. The bomb had ended Flagg's rule, but it left devastation behind. Las Vegas was a crater of radioactive silence. Randall Flagg had vanished. Whether destroyed or simply transformed, no one could say. Yet far away in the mountains, Stu Redmond still clung to life, lying beneath snow and silence, with a broken leg. He believed his friends were dead, and that his journey had failed. But against all odds, Tom Cullen returned to find him, guided by dreams and the voice of Mother Abagail. He cared for Stu, fed him, and slowly helped him heal. Their return journey was grueling, filled with frostbite, infection, and uncertainty. But step by step, they moved toward home. Along the way, they saw signs of change. Abandoned towns beginning to stir again. Life was pushing up through the ashes. And Stu, once a quiet man from Texas, now carried the weight of sacrifice and memory in his heart. Chapter 12. The Return to Boulder. Back in Boulder, Franny Goldsmith held on to fading hope that Stu might return. The community was smaller now, quieter, more solemn, but still standing. They had seen the face of evil and survived. Then one day, against all belief, Stu and Tom arrived at the edge of town. Franny broke into tears, running into his arms. It was not a victory parade. It was the return of broken heroes. They buried their dead, named their children, and tried to imagine a future beyond fear. The people of Boulder had changed. They were no longer just survivors. They were stewards of something sacred. Mother Abagail was gone, but her message remained. Faith, humility, and courage. For now, the evil was gone, but its shadow still lingered on the edge of memory. Chapter 13. The New World begins. Boulder started again, but not as before. This time, the leaders hesitated to rebuild what had already failed once. They questioned structure, power, and control. Instead of politics, they focused on simplicity. Families were formed, homes built from reclaimed wood, and gardens planted with care. Franny gave birth to her baby, a girl, whose cries echoed like hope in a quiet town. Other women had babies too, some immune, some not, and every new life was a fragile victory. There was no electricity at first, no great machines, no money, just human hands and human will. The world felt like Eden after the fall, beautiful, but forever haunted. Everyone carried ghosts, and yet the sun still rose. Every day was a second chance. Chapter 14. A Family on the Move. Despite the fragile peace, Franny felt a restlessness in her soul. she and Stu decided to leave Boulder behind and journey east to Maine, seeking solitude, healing, and a place to raise their child away from the noise of rebuilding. They packed their things into an old pickup truck and said quiet goodbyes. The road was long, but not empty. They encountered scattered signs of humanity. Other survivors, shy and uncertain, living in barns and forgotten homes. Some had created small enclaves. Some wandered alone. No one spoke of Flagg, but everyone remembered. Stu and Franny shared stories, cooked over fires, and learned how to be a family on the road. Their baby laughed in the back seat, not knowing the world she'd inherited. The road, once a symbol of death, became their path to something like life again. Chapter 15. Whispers of Evil. Far from Boulder, in a jungle across the sea, something stirred. A man with no memory of who he was stood before a primitive tribe. He smiled as they bowed, sensing their awe and fear. He had no name, but he had powers. Powers to control, to charm, to kill. And in his eyes burned a spark that had once belonged to Randall Flagg. Though his memories were gone, his instincts remained. He would build again. He would rule again. Evil, it seemed, didn't die, it simply moved. Quietly, patiently, waiting for the next crack in the human soul. Chapter 16. The Cost of Choice. As Stu and Franny journeyed farther from the ruins of the old world, their thoughts turned inward. Franny couldn't shake a lingering question. Would humanity learn from its near extinction, or simply repeat the same mistakes? Stu remained hopeful, trusting in small acts of goodness. They passed the bones of lost towns and saw new families planting gardens, repairing schools, and starting from zero. But the temptation of control, technology, and war loomed like old shadows. Franny feared that history might simply reset. Civilization always chasing comfort, always birthing new tyrants. In their private campfires, she and Stu debated what civilized should even mean now. Was it laws and machines, or kindness and humility? The stand had been made, but the echo of evil hadn't been silenced. It was still inside people, waiting for the right storm. In the end, the future would come down to one thing: the choices people made, again and again. Chapter 17. Quiet Hope. Eventually, Stu and Franny found a farmhouse in Maine, untouched, quiet, and surrounded by tall grass and distant trees. They made it their new beginning. No electricity, no phones, just them, the baby, and a place where the air still felt clean. They planted vegetables, patched the roof, and listened to birdsong instead of sirens. For the first time in months, they heard laughter, gentle, honest, healing. Franny still dreamed of those lost, but now they were memories, not ghosts. They didn't talk much about Flagg anymore. The world wasn't safe, but it was alive. Hope, they realized, didn't come in thunder or miracles. It came in quiet moments, in breathing, in surviving, and in deciding to keep loving no matter what. Chapter 18. Remembering the Lost. As their daughter grew, Stu and Franny told her stories, not just fairy tales, but the real ones. About Nick, the deaf-mute who led with courage. About Larry, who found his soul in the end. About Glenn, who laughed in the face of evil. And about Tom Cullen, who saved lives through love and innocence. They remembered Ralph, Dana, Judge Ferris, even Harold and Nadine, flawed and broken, but still human. Their stories became sacred, a new kind of scripture. No statues were built, but their names were spoken by firelight. Remembering wasn't just mourning, it was resistance. It was a promise, not to forget the cost of salvation, and not to waste what they had died to preserve. Chapter 19. The wheel turns. Time passed. The land healed. Trees grew over highways. Cities crumbled into ivy-covered ruins. New communities formed far from Boulder, unaware of what had come before. People built lives without television, without governments, without war, for now. But the wheel of time turns endlessly. Human nature doesn't change overnight. Curiosity returns. Technology is rediscovered. The temptation to rebuild the old world begins again. And so do the dangers. Still, some remember what was lost and what was won. The stand is not just an event, it is a warning. Chapter 20. The Final Stand. The stand was never truly about Randall Flagg or a virus. It was about choice. About what we become when everything else is stripped away. Some chose fear, others chose faith. Evil was loud, seductive, and persistent, but good was steady, humble, and real. And in that final balance, when the world was weighed, it was not strength that saved it, but sacrifice. Flagg might return in some form. There will always be storms. But as long as people remember what matters, kindness, love, truth, then the stand will never have been in vain. The final battle isn't over. It never is. But the light remains, burning quietly in those who refuse to give in. The stand isn't just a story about a plague or the collapse of civilization. It's about what survives when everything else is lost. It's about the choices we make when no one is watching. When power tempts us, when fear consumes us, when hope feels like a whisper. Stephen King stripped the world down to its bones to show us something raw, that good and evil aren't just forces outside us, they live inside us. Every character in this story had to make a stand. Some failed, some rose, but none were neutral. It reminds us that rebuilding the world isn't just about electricity and laws. It's about mercy, courage, and the willingness to sacrifice for others. In a world shattered by death, it was faith, love, and the refusal to give in to darkness that lit the way forward. The stand asks, when it's your turn to choose, when the world is on the edge, what will you stand for?